In an historic move, the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the former Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant. The ICC accused the two Israeli leaders of committing crimes against humanity. This is the first time a Western ally from a modern purported democracy has been charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity by a global judicial body. Let that sink in for a minute. The three Hamas leaders who had been listed on the indictment were since killed by Israel. The war in Gaza began in October 2023 after Hamas invaded Israel, killing about 1,200 Israelis and taking hundreds of hostages. Since the war was launched, more than 40,000 Palestinians have been killed. Israel has been accused of using starvation as a tool against the Palestinian people in Gaza, as well as other horrific war crimes. What all this means is that the two Israeli men could face arrest if they enter any country that is a party to the International Criminal Court. That includes all of Europe, but not the United States, Russia, or China. What this also does at a symbolic level is further isolate the Israeli leaders and the US in the eyes of the world, especially the global South.
Those arrest warrants come in the waning days of the Biden administration, further throwing a spotlight on his failed policies in the Middle East. Some say Biden's Mideast policy, in fact, contributed to the Democrats losing the presidency this month. As the Trump administration gets ready to take over the reins, Trump is expected to double down on his support for Israel and Netanyahu, perhaps, or maybe call for them to wrap up the effort in Gaza, as he said it must end soon. Meanwhile, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders has put legislation on the floor Wednesday to block the sale of some offensive weapons to Israel, but the Senate rejected his effort. Now, ahead of the vote, Sanders took to the podium where he said this.
But Prime Minister Netanyahu's extremist government has not simply waged war against Hamas. It has waged an all-out war against the Palestinian people. Madam President, within Gaza's population of just 2.2 million people, and I want people to conceptualize that, that's about the size of New Mexico. 2.2 million people, more than 43,000 Palestinians have been killed, and more than 103,000 injured, a population of about the size of New Mexico. The United States of America is complicit in all of these atrocities. We are funding these atrocities. That complicity must end, and that is what these resolutions are about. It is time to tell the Netanyahu government that they cannot use U.S. taxpayer dollars and American weapons in violation of U.S. and international law and our moral values.
So basically, Robby, my take on these developments from a personal perspective is that I welcome the ICC arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant. I think there was a very compelling case made when those documents were originally released. The Bernie Sanders comments we'll get to in a second, I think he made a good case, and of course it went nowhere. But, you know, as far as Netanyahu and Gallant are concerned, the issue that I have is twofold. One is the Biden administration's support for them, using vast American taxpayer funds to send weapons and to otherwise aid Israel. And also the fact that in both these cases, it seems to me that there is an argument or evidence on its face that they are guilty of war crimes. It is a war crime to use starvation, again, as a weapon of war. They said they were going to do that, and they did it. It is a war crime to engage in collective punishment of a civilian population, and they said they were going to do it, and they did it. The Biden administration, I think to its shame, doesn't accept anything that I have just said and continues to push back very strongly against the International Criminal Court and any suggestion of war crimes by the leaders of Israel. I think they're wrong.
So there's a lot that I agree with you on pertaining to this issue. For instance, I would have wholeheartedly voted for Bernie Sanders' amendment there. I don't think we need to assist Israel any further. I think our interests are diverging. I think if they want to make war with all of their neighbors and drag us into some greater conflict, we should separate from that. We have our own problems here at home. I also think they killed Yahya Sinwar, the architect of October 7th. They should say mission accomplished and end what is now a wholesale slaughter of thousands of innocent people in Gaza that is unconscionable. I think it's impossible to defend. I wouldn't try to defend it. I don't agree with it. All that said, I will admit I am very skeptical of international criminal court, or just I'm certainly more skeptical of international authorities than you are, and that being the proper way to address these issues. I mean, what if they were to put that in practice? If he were to travel to a country and then they were going to try to arrest him, he could perceive that as an attack or an act of war? I mean, that would, in some ways, that's calling for more conflict to address the actions you don't like. So I'm not in favor of that. I am in favor of the opposite of what the Biden administration has done, which is, yes, back Netanyahu at every turn. I don't think that is right. I don't, it starts to get troubling to me. I don't want to defend what they've done, because what they've done is horrible. It's not, they were trying to weed out and kill a terrorist organization that has embedded itself in a vulnerable civilian population. And the pursuit of the attempts to kill those terrorists have resulted in thousands of innocent deaths, and I don't think they should have done this to this extent. But I am not sold on that pursuing that is a criminal. It's not. I do not believe their goal was deliberately to murder civilians or to starve on purpose civilians. Now they have been too callous and too willing to stomach basically unlimited civilian deaths in their pursuit of a military objective. Do I think that should be prosecuted by some international criminal court? I would say probably ultimately no.
So let me be clear for a start from the more sympathetic to the Palestinian side. Sometimes,
but I'm maximally sympathetic, and I think they should stop doing what they're doing.
No, absolutely. And to be fair, sometimes people who are more sympathetic to the Palestinians seek to minimize what happened on October 7th. I do not. I think that was a heinous attack. I think that was a war crime in and of itself. There was a deliberate attack. Some members of the military were attacked, but also lots and lots of civilians were murdered, and that's indefensible. But I do think that in relation to the Israeli response, I think that there has been an unspoken but clear effort at ethnic cleansing. I tend to avoid the word genocide, which a lot of people use, because I think it takes you into semantic disputes that are not particularly helpful. 44,000 Palestinians have been killed. That's an astronomical death toll. The reason I do think that it is de facto ethnic cleansing is that they are literally razing areas, pushing people out of those areas, or trying in some instances to restrict aid to the point where people have no option but to move. There are also lots of instances of just terrible individual actions, whether it's the murder, I would call it, of the young girl Hind Rajab, lots of attacks on aid convoys, attacks on hospitals, the use of sniper drones to kill people. It is a conflict or a counter-offensive, an assault by Israel, which was a reaction to a horrendous attack upon them, but which has gone over every line in terms of its own inhumanity. And I hope that Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Gallant do face some conflict.
On some level, isn't that just, that's the nature of war is inhuman? We are watching, rarely something, we do not often see in modern times what a war looks like, a war between the state of Israel and a terrorist organization that is the de facto representative government of. Now they didn't actually choose them, but and I go back in World War II. We were willing to destroy every city in Germany. We would have blown up. We would have nuked every city in Japan until they surrendered. With the modern spin, would we say this resulted in thousands and thousands of the firebombing of Tokyo killed thousands and thousands of innocent people. It was a total war to defeat the people on the other side, and once they surrendered, it was done. And at no point has Hamas surrendered. I'm not really adapting this argument because, again, I think Israel should cease, and we should certainly cease our support of what they're doing. I don't think it's worth it, and they have killed the person responsible for October 7th at this point. But that would be in trying to impose like standards of, this is not the way war is supposed to be conducted. Well, we just don't see war conducted on this scale very often now.
Well, no, but there are rules of war. I mean, the nature of rules of war, yes, I take the point that it is a very macabre topic by its nature. But as the international community has still arrived at things that are definitions of war crimes, and if you commit those, you should face consequences for it. And yes, war is inevitably horrible, and yes, lots of people die, but I would argue that this has been especially egregious in just a completely blithe disregard for civilians. That is not to suggest that I would defend the firebombing of Dresden or the dropping of nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I think those were outrageous events.
Good discussion. Let us know what you think in the comments. I do read them. And we've got a lot more to talk about today on Rising. Stay with us.